You don't belong here, says luxury car dealer manager to black man interested in purchase. Marcus Johnson stared in disbelief at the finger pointed in his face. He never imagined his dream of buying a luxury car after years of saving would end in public humiliation at a dealership in the Upper East Side of New York City. "Your place isn't here," shouted the impeccably dressed manager Richard Williamson, while other customers watched the scene uncomfortably. Marcus, a successful 35-year-old engineer, just clenched his fists, swallowed his wounded pride, and walked out of the upscale dealership with his head down. When he got home to his apartment in Astoria, Marcus slammed his keys onto the table. The two-bedroom apartment, earned through years of hard work, suddenly felt too small to contain his anger. His framed degrees on the wall, his bachelor's and master's from the New York Institute of Technology, seemed to mock him. What was the point of all that effort if, in the end, his skin still determined how he'd be treated? "I can't believe this happened in 2024, he muttered to himself, loosening his tie and collapsing onto the couch. His phone rang insistently. It was his sister, Jessica. "Mark, are we still on for dinner tomorrow? I can't wait for you to meet Richard." Her cheerful voice clashed with the storm of emotions inside him. "Jess, I'm not in the best mood. I got humiliated at a dealership today. The manager kicked me out in front of everyone." "Oh my God, why? Why do you think?" Marcus replied, bitterly. "Same as always, I don't look like someone who can afford a car like that." "That's outrageous. Which dealership was it?" "Premium Motors, the one on Fifth Avenue." Silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Jess, you there?" "Mark?" Jessica's voice trembled. "Richard works there. He's the general manager of Premium Motors." Marcus's blood ran cold. The man who had publicly humiliated him was his sister's boyfriend, the one she'd been gushing about for weeks. "There must be some mistake," Jessica continued, her voice strained. "Richard wouldn't do that. He's polite, kind." "Jess, you think I wouldn't recognize the man who pointed his finger in my face, who yelled in front of everyone that my place wasn't there?" That night, Marcus barely slept. The image of Richard's accusing finger blended with the disappointment in his sister's voice, turning into a waking nightmare. He thought of his father, Samuel, who had worked as a doorman in luxury buildings for decades to give his children an education. "Study, son. It's the one thing no one can take from you," he used to say. Marcus had studied, graduated with honors, built a respectable career. But in the end, to people like Richard, he was still just a black man out of place. The next morning, the phone woke Marcus from a restless sleep. It was Jessica again, her voice a mix of anger and sadness. "I broke up with him, Mark. I confronted Richard last night about what happened." "What did he say?" "First, he denied it, said it must have been another employee. When I pushed, he claimed you were causing trouble and had been aggressive with his staff." "What?" Marcus shot up from the bed. "That's a lie. I didn't even say anything. I just left." "I know, Mark. I know my brother. That's why I ended it. I can't be with someone who would do what he did and then lie so shamelessly." Marcus felt a weight in his chest. He didn't want his sister to suffer, but at the same time, he felt vindicated that she believed him without question. "Thank you for trusting me, Jess." "Always, Mark. We're family." She paused. "There's one more thing. He didn't take the breakup well. He got upset, said I was throwing away our relationship over a misunderstanding." 3 days later, Jessica showed up at Marcus's apartment door, visibly shaken. A literature teacher at a public school in New York City, she usually carried herself with confidence, but at that moment she seemed smaller, diminished. "He won't leave me alone, Mark. Richard keeps calling me. Showed up at the school yesterday. Hi, scaring my students." Marcus hugged his sister, feeling anger rise inside him. "We'll handle this. He won't get away with it," he said, guiding her inside. As he prepared tea to calm Jessica, Marcus turned on the living room TV. A news segment about the economic crisis showed business owners worried about the future. "The crisis is even affecting luxury sectors," the reporter said, as the camera panned to the facade of a family-owned dealership. Premium Motors, a staple in the market for over 40 years, is facing its worst financial crisis yet, according to industry sources. Marcus and Jessica exchanged a knowing look. "That's where he works," Jessica said. "Seems like they have bigger problems than harassing customers," Marcus replied with a touch of bitter irony. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now, back to the story. The next morning, driven by a mix of outrage and curiosity, Marcus made a decision. He put on his best suit, the one he wore for important presentations, and headed to the dealership. Not to buy a car, but to confront Richard, to show he wouldn't be intimidated. As he stepped into the gleaming showroom, where imported cars rested on flawless marble floors, Marcus didn't see Richard. Instead, an older gentleman with silver hair and an elegant demeanor was speaking with an employee. Noticing Marcus, the man approached. "May I help you?" he asked with a politeness that contrasted sharply with the treatment Marcus had received days before. "I'm looking for Richard Williamson," Marcus replied, keeping his composure. "I'm Arthur Wilson, owner of Premium Motors. Richard is my nephew. He's not here at the moment. Is there something I can assist you with?" Marcus hesitated. He hadn't expected to meet the owner. For a moment he considered turning around and leaving, but then he remembered the humiliation, the finger pointed in his face, Jessica crying. "Actually, yes. I was here a few days ago to buy a car and was disrespected by your nephew." Arthur's expression hardened slightly. "Shall we discuss this in my office?" he offered, gesturing toward a frosted glass door at the back of the showroom. The office was elegant and traditional, with dark wood furniture and vintage photos on the walls. One showed a much smaller dealership from the 80s, featuring a younger Arthur standing beside another man. "What exactly happened, Mr. Johnson?" "Marcus Johnson." "Mr. Johnson, please tell me what occurred." Marcus recounted the incident, in detail, sticking to the facts without exaggeration. As he spoke, he noticed Arthur's expression growing more serious. "I deeply regret what happened, Mr. Johnson. This goes against everything Premium Motors stands for, or should stand for." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "The truth is, we're going through difficult times. Financially, I mean. Richard has taken on more responsibilities lately, but—" He stopped himself, as if he'd said, "Too much. I'm not here for compensation, Mr. Wilson. I just wanted you to know what kind of behavior is happening in your company." Arthur nodded solemnly. "I appreciate your honesty. I'll take action. You have my word." He stood, extending his hand to Marcus. "And if you're still interested in one of our vehicles, it would be my pleasure to assist you personally." As he left the dealership, Marcus felt strangely unsettled. His conversation with Arthur had been cordial, but there was something unspoken hanging in the air, as if the owner was hiding something important. When he got home, he found a scene he hadn't expected. His mother, Catherine, was sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. Jessica, beside her, held her hand. "Mum, what happened?" he asked, alarmed, dropping his briefcase and rushing to them. "They let me go, son," Catherine replied, her voice trembling, handing him an envelope. 20 years working at the same cleaning company, and they didn't even bother to tell me in person. They sent this letter." Marcus opened the envelope with shaky fingers. The letter, cold and impersonal, announced Catherine Johnson's termination from Total Cleaning, citing internal restructuring as the reason. "You were always their best employee, Mom. This doesn't make sense." "That's what I said," Jessica agreed, wrapping an arm around her mother's shoulders. "It sounds like the company lost a big contract and had to cut staff." Marcus kept examining the letter until his eyes landed on a small detail in the header. The Total Cleaning logo had tiny letters beneath it, a subsidiary of the Wilson Group. "Wilson?" he murmured, a chill running down his spine. "Mom, did you know Total Cleaning is owned by the same group as the Premium Motors dealership?" Catherine wiped her tears, frowning in confusion. "No, son. They never told me that." Marcus sat down heavily, sharing with them his encounter with Arthur Wilson that morning. The pieces were starting to come together, but they formed a disturbing puzzle. "You think this isn't a coincidence?" Jessica asked, voicing the thought lingering in everyone's minds. "I don't believe in coincidences like this," Marcus replied, "but I still don't get it. Why fire our mom? What would Richard gain from this? Maybe it's revenge, Jessica suggested. I broke up with him. You confronted his uncle. Maybe he found out where Mom worked and used his influence to hurt her. Catherine, who had been listening silently, spoke up with a dignity that surprised her children. If that's the case, he picked the wrong family to mess with. The Johnsons don't bow to injustice. Your father, God rest his soul, taught us that. That same evening during dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Felicia Brown, a longtime neighbor and friend of the Johnson family. A veteran journalist at the city's top newspaper, Felicia was just months away from mandatory retirement. Catherine, I heard what happened. I came to see how you're doing, she said, hugging Catherine tightly. Thank you, Felicia. We're trying to make sense of all this. As they drank coffee in the living room, Marcus and Jessica explained the connections they'd uncovered. The prejudice at the dealership, the breakup, and now their mother's sudden dismissal. Felicia listened intently, her journalistic instincts sharpening with growing interest. This isn't just an isolated case of discrimination, she concluded. There seems to be a pattern of troubling behavior at this company. She paused, looking at the three of them. If you'll allow me, I'd like to investigate this for a story. It'd be my last big piece before retirement. Marcus hesitated. We don't want to cause more trouble, Felicia. We've been through enough. I understand your concern, Marcus. But how many other people might be going through the same thing? How many don't have a voice to defend themselves? Felicia argued. I promise to be discreet and factual. No names will be used without permission. After a long family discussion, the Johnsons agreed. Felicia would begin her investigation quietly, looking for other similar cases and verifying the financial state of the Wilson Group. 2 weeks later, Felicia's article was published on the front page of the business section. Discrimination and Crisis, the Dark Side of the Luxury Market. The carefully written piece reported cases of discrimination in high-end establishments across the city, including the incident with Marcus, without mentioning names. It also addressed the precarious financial situation of several companies in the sector, among them the Wilson Group, suggesting that economic pressure might be exacerbating discriminatory behavior against customers deemed less promising. The impact was immediate. The article was shared thousands of times on social media, sparking heated debates about racism in commercial settings. Interviews with experts and anonymous testimonies from other customers who had faced discrimination followed the original report. To Marcus's surprise, his phone rang that afternoon. It was Arthur Wilson. Mr. Johnson, I need to speak with you urgently, said the businessman, his voice tense. I assume you've seen today's article. Yes, I have, Marcus replied cautiously. I don't know if you were the one who spoke to the journalist, and I'm not here to accuse you. But the situation has gotten more complicated. Richard is furious, threatening to sue the newspaper for defamation. He claims the article distorted the facts and that you're behind it. Mr. Wilson, I didn't give any interview, and the article doesn't even mention my name or your company specifically. I know. But Richard has an influence within the group, and he's determined to find someone to blame. The conversation ended with Arthur asking Marcus to meet him again, this time at a neutral cafe, far from the dealership. There are things I need to tell you, he said cryptically. Marcus hung up with a sense of unease. He shared the news with Jessica and Mrs. Catherine, who reacted with concern. Be careful, son, warned Mrs. Catherine. People in power will do anything to keep it. The next day, before the scheduled meeting with Arthur, Marcus received a disturbing call from Jessica. Mark, Richard is harassing me again. He found my new number and is sending me accusatory messages. He says our family is trying to destroy his and that he'll make us pay. Marcus felt his blood boil. Did you save those messages? Yes, they're all here. Good. If he keeps it up, we're going to the police. As he hung up, Marcus noticed an email that had just arrived. It was from the director of the engineering firm where he worked. We need to talk about your professional situation. Please come to my office today at 3 p.m. Marcus's heart raced. First his mother, now him. Could Richard's influence really reach this far? The meeting with his director confirmed his worst fears. Though the executive was vague about the reasons, it was clear the company had received concerning information about Marcus. Important clients have expressed reservations about your involvement in certain projects, the director said, never making direct eye contact. Marcus left the office stunned. In just weeks, his life was falling apart, publicly humiliated, his sister harassed, his mother fired, and now his career threatened. All because of a man who felt entitled to point his finger in his face and say, "You don't belong here." At the cafe, Arthur Wilson looked like he had aged years in just days. The dark circles under his eyes and slightly trembling hands revealed the stress he was under. "Thank you for coming, Marcus," he said, after ordering 2 coffees. "The situation is out of control. Richard has convinced the group's board to sue the newspaper. He's saying it's all a conspiracy to harm the company. Mr. Wilson, with all due respect, your nephew is the one conspiring. My mother was fired after 20 years, and now I'm having trouble at work. This isn't a coincidence." Arthur lowered his eyes. "I fear you may be right. Richard has always had issues, but he's my nephew, my sister's son. After she passed, I promised to look after him. And that justifies what he's doing to us?" "No, of course not." Arthur hesitated, then continued in a quieter voice. "The truth is, Richard has more power than he should. A few years ago, when I had health problems, he took on key roles in the group. At the time, it seemed like the right decision. Now I realize it was a terrible mistake." "Why?" Arthur glanced around, making sure no one could hear them. "I suspect he's embezzling company funds. The numbers don't add up. Important contracts were cancelled without clear explanation." The businessman rubbed his tired face. "When you came forward reporting the incident, I started paying closer attention to his behavior. I noticed disturbing patterns." Marcus listened carefully, trying to process what this meant. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need your help, Marcus. I know you're an engineer, that you understand numbers and systems. I need an outsider who can analyze our financial situation without raising suspicions. Someone Richard doesn't control." Arthur's proposal was surprising. Marcus would act as an external consultant, pretending to evaluate investment opportunities for the company while secretly investigating Richard's possible fraud. "And why would I help you after everything?" "That's happened because if I'm right about Richard, you'll have concrete evidence to stop him, and because I promised to make things right for your family. Your mother will be reinstated with full benefits, and I'll personally write a glowing recommendation letter for your employer." Marcus left the coffee shop with his mind racing. Arthur's offer was tempting, but also risky. He'd be walking into the lion's den, challenging someone who had already shown he was willing to harm him. At home, he found a family meeting in progress. Besides Jessica and Mrs. Catherine, his paternal grandmother, Mrs. Zora, a 78-year-old woman who rarely left her apartment in the same neighborhood, was there. Her stern expression signaled the seriousness of the discussion. "Grandma, what a nice surprise," said Marcus, kissing her forehead. "The nice surprise is hearing my grandson is standing up to the big shots," the old woman replied with an enigmatic smile. "Jessica told me everything." Mrs. Zora Johnson was a formidable figure in the family. A widow for over 20 years, she had raised her 3 children alone after her husband's early passing. Marcus had always admired her strength, but he'd never seen it as vividly as now. "Do you think this is the first time our family has faced people who think they can walk all over us?" she asked, looking at each of them. "Your grandfather, by Harold, was one of the first black bus drivers in this city. Do you know how many passengers refused to board his bus? How many times they tried to get him fired?" Marcus, Jessica, and Mrs. Catherine listened in silence. Mrs. Zora rarely spoke about the past. "And me, working as a pastry chef for Rich. People's parties. How many times did I have to enter through the back door? But do you know what we, the Johnsons, did?" Her eyes shone with a mix of pride and defiance. "We resisted, not with violence, not with hatred, but with competence, with dignity, doing our job so well they couldn't ignore us." The room fell silent as Mrs. Zora's words lingered. Marcus felt something stir inside him, a connection to his roots, to the strength of generations before him. "Grandma, the owner of the dealership, offered me a job as a consultant. He suspects his nephew, that Richard guy, is embezzling money from the company." Mrs. Zora nodded slowly. And what are you going to do? I'm thinking of accepting. Not for the compensation he offered, but to show who really doesn't belong there. A slow smile spread across Mrs. Zora's wrinkled face. That's my grandson. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In the following weeks, Marcus began his work as a consultant at Premium Motors. As Arthur had predicted, Richard was furious about his hiring, but couldn't openly oppose his uncle's decision without raising suspicions. It's just a financial analysis for potential investors, Arthur explained during a tense meeting. Mr. Johnson has impressive qualifications. He has no experience in our industry, Richard shot back, barely hiding his disdain. Exactly why we need him. We need a fresh perspective, untainted by our usual practices. Marcus watched the exchange with interest. Richard either didn't recognize him as the customer he'd thrown out weeks earlier or pretended not to. Either way, the manager's discomfort was palpable. With access to the company's financial systems, Marcus began noticing irregular patterns. Overpriced contracts with shell companies, misallocations disguised as strategic consulting, selective, firings that seemed more like personal revenge than business necessity. The situation was worse than Arthur had imagined. Meanwhile, the Johnson family's personal life was stabilizing. Thanks to Arthur's discreet intervention, Mrs. Catherine was reinstated at total cleaning, supposedly due to an administrative error. At Marcus's company, the reservations about his involvement in projects mysteriously vanished. Jessica, however, kept receiving disturbing messages from Richard. Though less frequent, the tone had shifted from accusatory to almost threatening. "You have no idea what's coming," one read. One night, working late at the dealership, Marcus realized he wasn't alone. Richard had returned and was in his office, seemingly unaware of Marcus's presence. Curious, the engineer moved closer silently, and through the slightly open door saw something alarming. Richard was tampering with documents, replacing original pages with altered versions. Then he photographed the new documents with his phone. Marcus stepped back cautiously, his heart pounding. He'd just witnessed what looked like corporate document forgery, exactly the kind of proof Arthur needed. The next day, Marcus arrived early and, using his system access, located the documents Richard had altered. As he suspected, they were supply contracts with significantly inflated values. The difference, Marcus guessed, was being funneled into an account controlled by the manager. With this information, Marcus arranged an urgent meeting with Arthur at his home. The businessman listened intently, his aged face a mix of sorrow and resolve. "I suspected something like this, but not the extent," he said, examining the copies Marcus had brought. "This explains our financial crisis. It's not just the market, it's betrayal." "What do you plan to do, Mr. Wilson?" Arthur thought for a moment. "I'll call an emergency meeting. All employees, key clients, our lawyer. I'll expose everything." "Are you sure? Richard might react badly, try to get ahead of you. He's done enough harm, Marcus, to the company, to your family, who knows how many others." This ends now. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning. Marcus arrived early, sensing the tension in the air. Employees huddled in small groups, speculating about the sudden summons. Richard moved among them, seemingly calm, but with a tense glint in his eyes. At exactly 10 o'clock, Arthur Wilson entered the showroom, which had been rearranged with chairs for all present. To Marcus's surprise, standing beside Arthur were Felicia Brown, the family's journalist friend, and a man in a suit whom Marcus recognized as the company's lawyer. "Good morning, everyone," Arthur began, his voice steady despite his age. "I appreciate each of you being here. This meeting is difficult for me, both professionally and personally." The businessman paused, looking directly at Richard, who held his gaze with a confident smile. "Premium Motors and the Wilson Group are facing the worst crisis in our history. But I recently discovered that this crisis isn't just due to the economy or poor management. It's the result of," he took a deep breath, "systematic fraud." A murmur spread through the room. Richard stepped forward. "Uncle, I don't think this is the best way to—" "Let me finish, Richard," Arthur cut in with a firmness that silenced his nephew. Over the past few years, millions of dollars have been siphoned from the company through fraudulent contracts and fictitious expenses. He gestured to the lawyer, who handed out folders containing documents to those present. All the details. Are there verified by an independent audit? Richard visibly paled, his eyes darting quickly between the shocked faces around him. "This is absurd. It's a conspiracy to ruin me," he exploded, pointing at Marcus. "This man hacked our systems, manipulated information." Arthur shook his head. "The evidence predates Mr. Johnson's arrival as a consultant. In fact," he turned to Marcus. "Perhaps it's time to clarify another matter. Mr. Johnson, would you please stand?" Marcus obeyed, confused. This young man came to our dealership as a customer, interested in buying one of our luxury vehicles. He was treated with disrespect and prejudice by an employee who judged based solely on his appearance that his place wasn't here. More murmurs, now mixed with looks of understanding and indignation. "That employee," Arthur continued, "was you, Richard." The manager, now completely unhinged, lunged toward Marcus. You planned all this. You came here pretending to have money for a car you could never afford just to ruin me." "Mr. Williamson," Marcus said calmly, a stark contrast to Richard's fury. "I'm a senior engineer at Horizon Engineering. I earn enough to buy any car in this dealership outright if I choose. The only one pretending here was you, pretending you could judge my worth by the color of my skin." The showroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Employees who had suffered under Richard's arrogant management, customers who had witnessed or experienced similar situations, all seemed relieved to see the truth come to light. Richard, realizing he had lost control of the situation, made one last desperate attempt. "You don't understand. This company was sinking. I was just trying to salvage what I could to create a financial cushion for harder times. Uncle Arthur was sick, incapable of making tough decisions." Arthur stepped closer to his nephew, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Richard, you're fired, and as of today you're off the Wilson Group's board. Our lawyer will be in touch to discuss repayment of the misappropriated funds." Turning to the others, he continued, "I apologize to everyone for the disruption caused by actions that occurred under my oversight. From now on, Premium Motors will have new leadership built on transparency and respect." Hours later, with the showroom empty, Arthur and Marcus spoke in the office. The morning's tension had given way to thoughtful exhaustion. "I still can't believe he reacted that way," Marcus commented. "It was like all the masks fell off at once." "Richard always struggled with contradictions," Arthur replied. "He grew up privileged, but somehow convinced himself he was fighting against adversity. He saw enemies where there were just people different from him. And now, what happens to the company?" Arthur looked out the window at the sunset painting. New York City in shades of orange and pink. "Now we start over. Honestly, I don't know if I have the energy for it." He turned to Marcus. Unless what? Unless you're interested in a new professional challenge." Marcus raised his eyebrows, surprised. "Are you offering me a permanent job?" "I'm offering more than that. I'm offering a partnership. Your technical knowledge, your integrity, your fresh perspective. It's exactly what this company needs to reinvent itself." The proposal was tempting and terrifying at the same time. Marcus asked for a few days to think, aware that a decision like this would affect not just his career, but his entire life. The next evening, Marcus gathered his family to discuss the offer. Catherine, Jessica, and Zora listened carefully as he explained the pros and cons. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, son," Catherine said, "but also a big risk." "What do you really want, Mark?" Jessica asked, always direct. Marcus thought for a moment. "I want to make a difference. I want to prove that places like that are rightfully ours too. I want to turn that phrase, 'you don't belong here,' into something no one ever hears again." Zora, who had been quiet until then, gave her grandson's hand a gentle pat. "Then you already have your answer, my boy." 3 months passed. Premium Motors, now under new management, was slowly recovering from the crisis. Marcus, as the new operations director, had implemented significant changes: full transparency in processes, diversity training for all employees, partnerships with technical schools in outer boroughs for internship programs. One Saturday morning, as Marcus worked in his new office at the dealership, the receptionist announced an unexpected visitor, Richard Williamson. The former manager looked drastically different. The expensive clothes and arrogant air had been replaced by a simpler appearance and a weary expression. Marcus greeted him cautiously but without hostility. "What can I do for you, Richard?" The man hesitated at the door, as if reconsidering his decision to come. "I came to apologize," he finally said, stepping inside and sitting in the chair Marcus offered, "for what I did to you, to your family, for everything." Marcus studied his former tormentor's face, searching for signs of insincerity. He found none. "What happened?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I lost everything," Richard admitted. "My job, my family's respect, my apartment." He paused. "But mostly I lost respect for myself. When you confronted me in that meeting, I saw my reflection in everyone's eyes. And I didn't like what I saw. And now I'm trying to rebuild. I started therapy, realized I carry prejudices I didn't even know I had, things I learned without questioning, things I repeated without thinking." The silence between the two men was heavy with meaning. It wasn't reconciliation, nor easy forgiveness, but an acknowledgement that change, though difficult, was possible. "I also came to give you this," Richard continued, placing an envelope on the table. "It's a formal apology letter. For you, your sister, your mother. It doesn't change the past, but it's a start." Marcus took the envelope without opening. "Disa, thank you. I'll share it with my family." Richard stood to leave but stopped at the door. "You've transformed this place," he said, looking around. "It's almost unrecognizable." "That's the goal," Marcus replied, "to make it a place where everyone is welcome." After Richard's departure, Marcus Johnson was lost in thought. The unexpected visit had made him reflect on his own journey. Over the past few months, from a discriminated customer to a director, from a victim to an agent of change. That afternoon, the dealership would host a special event, the launch of the Premium Motors Professional Inclusion and Training Program, an initiative to train young people from underserved neighborhoods in mechanics, sales, and administration. The idea had come from a conversation between Marcus and Mrs. Zora about how to turn painful experiences into opportunities for others. The dealership's lot was decorated with colorful banners. Dozens of young people and their families selected for the program's first class, mingled with employees, customers, and journalists. Felicia Brown, now officially retired but serving as a consultant for the program, chatted animatedly with Arthur Wilson, who seemed rejuvenated by the company's new purpose. Jessica, who had left teaching to coordinate Premium Motors' educational program, stepped onto the small makeshift stage. "Welcome, everyone. Today we're not just launching a training program, we're reaffirming a commitment that this space belongs to all of us, no matter where we come from or what we look like." The applause was warm. Marcus, watching from the back of the room, felt an emotion he couldn't quite name. It wasn't exactly pride or satisfaction. It was something deeper, more connected to the stories Mrs. Zora had shared, to the quiet struggles of his father and mother, to everyone who had come before him. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Mrs. Catherine approached her son, followed by Mrs. Zora, leaning on her cane adorned with colorful ribbons. "Your father would be so proud, my son," said Mrs. Catherine, tears in her eyes. "He's watching," Mrs. Zora said with conviction. From somewhere, Samuel is watching his son turn "you don't belong here" into "this place is ours too." Arthur Wilson joined the family group, carrying a small box. "Marcus, I have something for you," the businessman said, handing him the box. Inside was a shiny key with the logo of the dealership's most luxurious brand. "The first car of Premium Motors' new chapter," Arthur explained, "and it couldn't go to anyone more fitting." Marcus stared at the key, remembering the day he had walked into that same dealership full of expectations, only to leave humiliated. The journey since then had been painful, revealing, transformative, not just for him but for everyone around him. "Thank you, Arthur, "But I think I need to buy my own car," he replied, handing back the key with a smile. "On my own merit, as has always been the Johnson way." Arthur nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind the refusal. "Then consider it a substantial discount. Business partners always get special terms." As they walked together toward the stage, where Jessica was calling them for the official speech, Marcus thought about how life took unexpected turns. The place where he had once been rejected had not only become his workplace, but a space for community transformation. On stage, in front of everyone, Marcus took the microphone. "Just a few months ago, in this very place, I heard words no one should ever hear. You don't belong here." He paused, letting the words linger. "Today, I'm here to tell each of you, especially the young people starting this journey, with us, your place is wherever you want it to be. Your place is anywhere your dreams, your effort, and your talent can take you." The applause was deafening. Arms raised, smiling faces, entire families celebrating not just the start of a program, but the affirmation of a possibility many had believed was beyond their reach. After the event, when most guests had already left, Marcus walked through the quiet showroom. He stopped in front of the same car he had admired on that first day, the vehicle of his dreams. He ran his hand gently over the flawless bodywork, no longer as someone excluded, but as someone who had earned his place through merit and persistence. "Good evening, Mr. Johnson," said a voice behind him. It was Claire, one of the new salespeople, hired through the inclusion program. "Would you like to take it for a test drive?" Marcus smiled, appreciating the irony of the situation. "Yes, Claire, actually, I think I'm ready to make the deal." In the weeks that followed, life took on a new rhythm for the Johnson family. Catherine, inspired by her son's transformation, decided to return to school. She enrolled in a business administration course, fulfilling a long-held dream she had postponed to raise her children. "It's never too late to start over," she would say, repeating the mantra that had become common in the Johnson household. Jessica expanded Premium Motors' educational program to include evening classes for adults, making professional training more accessible to those who worked during the day. Her talent as an educator, once confined to the classroom, now impacted dozens of lives in ways she had never imagined possible. Zora, the family matriarch, became an informal advisor to the program. Her 78 years of wisdom and life experience were treasured like gold by the young apprentices, who often sought her out for stories of resilience and perseverance. Grandma Zora, as they affectionately called her, embodied the bridge between a past of struggles and a future of possibilities. One Friday afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected visitor in his office, Felicia Brown, accompanied by a news crew. "We're doing a special report on positive business transformations," explained the journalist, her hair now completely white but her energy unwavering despite her official retirement. "And Premium Motors is our main case study." "I'm flattered, Felicia, but this was all a team effort," Marcus replied modestly. "No doubt, but teams need leaders, and your personal story is at the heart of this transformation." The interview was long and thorough. Marcus shared not only the positive financial results of the company's new phase, but above all, the social impact of the changes implemented. He spoke about the 50 young people from the first training program cohort, the employees previously dismissed by Richard who'd been rehired, and the new anti-discrimination policies that had become a model for others in the industry. "Do you believe what happened here can be replicated in other business environments?" Felicia asked at one point. "I do, but with one essential condition. We must recognize that exclusion and prejudice aren't just misunderstandings or isolated incidents. They're structural problems that demand equally structural solutions." The report aired 2 weeks later, sparking a wave of positive reactions. Business leaders from various sectors reached out to Premium Motors, eager to learn about the inclusion program. Universities invited Marcus to speak at lectures and panels on workplace diversity. The training program, initially modest, began receiving support from foundations and institutes interested in its expansion. Amid all this positive attention, Marcus received an email that left him particularly thoughtful. It was from Richard Williamson. "Marcus, I saw the report about Premium Motors. The work you're doing is admirable. Over the past few months, I've reflected deeply on my past behavior and the consequences of my actions. Therapy has helped me recognize toxic patterns I repeated for years without question. I don't expect your forgiveness, nor am I asking to return. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to be a better person. I've started volunteering with a social project in the outer boroughs, teaching basic financial skills to young entrepreneurs. It's small compared to the harm I caused, but it's a start. Thank you for not letting my prejudice define your path. Your response to discrimination was to create opportunities, not just for yourself, but for many others. Richard Williamson. Marcus reread the email several times, surprised by the sincerity he sensed in his former manager's words. He decided to reply briefly but meaningfully. Richard, thank you for sharing your growth journey. Personal transformation may be the hardest of all. Stay the course you've chosen, Marcus Johnson. That exchange closed a painful chapter and opened possibilities for a different future. It wasn't exactly reconciliation, but a mutual acknowledgement that people can change, systems can be transformed, and stories can have endings different from what once seemed inevitable. 6 months after the training program launched, Premium Motors held a special ceremony, the graduation of its first class. The event, held in the dealership's showroom, transformed into an auditorium for the occasion, brought together graduates' families, employees, press, and representatives from partner companies. Marcus, wearing a tailored suit from the same shop his father frequented, watched with emotion as 50 young people stood in their makeshift gowns. Each carried stories of resilience, previously overlooked talents, and dreams that now seemed possible. Arthur Wilson, beside him, looked rejuvenated. The businessman's health had improved significantly in recent months, as if the company's new purpose had injected vitality into his veins. You know, Marcus, the older man remarked, adjusting his glasses to better observe the graduates, when you first walked into this dealership, I was about to sell everything. The company was sinking, not just financially, but morally. You didn't just save your place here, you saved all of ours. Marcus smiled, moved by the acknowledgement, but aware the transformation was a collective effort. We did this together, Arthur. You had the courage to recognize the problems and the humility to accept change. Jessica took the makeshift stage to begin the ceremony. Her calm presence and clear voice immediately captured everyone's attention. Today, we celebrate not just the completion of a course, but the start of a new chapter in each of these young lives. And perhaps most importantly, we celebrate living proof that barriers can be broken when there's will, opportunity, and commitment. One by one, the graduates were called. Each name came with a brief description of their achievements during the program and the roles they'd take on, either at Premium Motors or with partner companies committed to hiring program alumni. Among them was Luke Turner, a 19-year-old from the outer boroughs of New York City, who'd excelled in technical training. During the ceremony, it was announced Luke would become a senior technical assistant at the dealership, a position created specifically to leverage his exceptional talent. As he received his certificate, Luke turned to Marcus with tearful eyes. Mr. Johnson, before this program, I heard too many times that my place wasn't here in spaces like this. Not in those exact words, but through glances, closed doors, denied opportunities. You turned that phrase into motivation to change not just your life, but all of ours. The young man's sincerity deeply moved Marcus. In that moment, he fully understood the meaning of his journey. That painful phrase, "you don't belong here," which could have defined him as a victim, had become the catalyst for a transformation far greater than he'd ever imagined. After the ceremony, as guests enjoyed a cocktail reception prepared by a catering service, overseen by Mrs. Zora, who had insisted on personally supervising the menu, Marcus found a quiet moment. He discreetly stepped out to the parking lot, where his new car, finally purchased through his own merit, was parked. He sat on the hood, gazing at the stars beginning to appear in the New York City sky, rarely visible due to pollution, but exceptionally clear that night. He thought of his father, Samuel, who hadn't lived to see this moment of triumph. He thought of all the Johnsons who had come before him, facing barriers that had seemed insurmountable. "A penny for your thoughts," said Mrs. Catherine, approaching quietly and sitting beside her son. "I'm thinking about how we got here, Mom. How something so painful could turn into something so much bigger than us." Mrs. Catherine smiled, that serene smile that had always been Marcus's safe harbor in difficult times. "Your father used to say there are two kinds of people in the world, those who build walls and those who build bridges. Richard tried to build a wall between you and your dreams. You chose to build a bridge, not just for yourself, but for so many others." They sat in silence for a few minutes, sharing that moment of reflection under the shy stars of New York City. "You know what makes me proudest of you, son?" Mrs. Catherine continued. "It's not your professional success, not the new car, not even the training program. It's that when you faced prejudice, you didn't let hatred take over your heart. You turned pain into purpose." Marcus hugged his mother, feeling the simple yet profound wisdom in her words. It was true. At no point had his struggle been driven by revenge or resentment. It had always been about justice, about transformation, about creating spaces where people could be seen for their abilities, not for shallow prejudices. Back inside, Marcus was approached by an elegant woman who introduced herself as a representative of an international foundation focused on diversity and inclusion in the business world. "Mr. Johnson, we're impressed by the work you've developed here," she said, handing him a card. "Our foundation would like to document this experience and include it in our catalogue of global best practices. The possibility that Premium Motors' transformation could inspire change elsewhere, perhaps even internationally, was something Marcus hadn't considered. The idea that the pain he'd felt that day, when he heard "you don't belong here," might eventually help fewer people hear similar phrases around the world, was almost surreal. In the weeks that followed, Premium Motors received visits from business leaders, educators, and social activists interested in learning about the training program. The model developed by Marcus and Jessica began to be implemented with adaptations in other companies across the city. What had started as a response to an act of discrimination was becoming a larger movement, a ripple of change spreading in concentric circles. Amid this positive momentum, Marcus received a special invitation to speak at a major business forum on diversity and inclusion. It would be his first time speaking at an event of this scale, and the thought made him nervous. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, Jess," he confessed to his sister as they reviewed the draft of his presentation together. "What if I don't get the message across right? What if it sounds like we're just bragging about what we've done?" Jessica, ever practical, adjusted her brother's posture in front of the mirror. "Mark, you won't be talking about yourself. You'll be talking about possibilities, about how companies can transform when they recognize the value of diversity, not as a quota or an obligation, but as a real strength. About how prejudice isn't just morally wrong, but also terrible for business." The day of the talk arrived. The auditorium was packed, business owners, managers, students all listening intently as Marcus shared not just the positive results of Premium Motors' transformation, but especially the process, the challenges, the resistance they'd faced. "The phrase 'you don't belong here' isn't just a personal insult," he said at one point, capturing the audience's full attention. "It's the expression of a mindset that judges people based on appearances, backgrounds, or superficial traits. It's a mindset that limits not just the individuals being discriminated against, but the companies themselves, depriving them of talent, perspectives, and valuable contributions." The talk was a resounding success. Marcus, initially nervous, found his voice and his message as he spoke. By the end, the line of people wanting to talk to him seemed endless, some to share similar experiences, others to ask for guidance on implementing changes in their own companies. Among them was a distinguished-looking man with graying hair and piercing eyes. He introduced himself as Peter Thompson, owner of an expanding chain of dealerships across the country. "Your story moved me deeply, Marcus," he said after exchanging greetings. "Not just because of what you went through, but especially because of what you built from it. I'd like to talk to you about the possibility of implementing a similar program across all our locations." That initial conversation led to more formal meetings and eventually to a partnership. The methodology developed at Premium Motors would be adapted and implemented across all 12 of Thompson's dealerships nationwide. Marcus and Jessica would personally train the initial teams, creating a ripple effect that could potentially impact hundreds of young people from underserved communities in different regions. One Saturday afternoon, nearly a year after the original incident, Marcus drove his new car, finally bought on his own merit, through the streets of New York City. Beside him, Grandma Zora watched the city with her wise eyes, which had witnessed decades of change, progress, and setbacks. "You know, Grandma," Marcus said as they stopped at a red light, "when that happened at the dealership, I felt so small, so humiliated. I never imagined that from that pain, all this would come." Grandma Zora smiled, that enigmatic smile that seemed to hold the secrets of many generations. "That's how life is, my grandson. Sometimes the doors that try to slam in our faces are exactly the ones we need to walk through to get where we're meant to be." The light turned green and Marcus eased forward, reflecting on his grandmother's words. It was true, if Richard hadn't thrown him out that day, he would have simply bought a car and gone on with his life. He wouldn't have met Arthur, wouldn't have uncovered the fraud, wouldn't have created the training program. His personal pain had become the catalyst for something much bigger than himself. It was a powerful lesson on how to respond to injustice, not with more hatred, which only perpetuates destructive cycles, but with creativity, determination, and a vision for a better future, not just for oneself, but for everyone. "Where are we going again, Grandma?" asked Marcus, realizing he'd been so lost in thought he'd almost forgotten their destination. "To the community center in Queens," replied Mrs. Zora. "Remember? Today's the entrepreneurship workshop for women over 60. The project was a natural extension of Premium Motors' program. After noticing that many of the young apprentices had grandparents with dormant talents and dreams, Jessica had suggested creating specialized workshops for seniors. Mrs. Zora, with her experience as a baker, had become one of the volunteer instructors, teaching both culinary skills and basic pricing and marketing concepts. When they arrived at the community center, a simple but well-kept building, Marcus was surprised by the number of people there. What had started as a small family initiative had grown organically. Now dozens of women from different neighborhoods in New York City regularly attended, many bringing their own talents and knowledge to share. Mrs. Zora was greeted like a celebrity, hugged and welcomed by women of all ages. Marcus watched in awe as his grandmother, at 78, radiated energy and inspiration to women, society often made invisible. "Marcus," Jessica called, approaching excitedly, "we have a surprise for you." She led him to a back room in the center, where a group of young people, some recognizable as graduates of the Premium Motors program, were gathered around a table covered with a cloth. "What's this?" Marcus asked, curious. Luke, the young technician who had excelled in the program, spoke up. "Mr. Johnson, all of us here have been touched by your story in some way. When you stood up to that manager who said, 'Your place isn't here,' you weren't just fighting for yourself, you were fighting for all of us." The young man signaled, and two colleagues removed the cloth, revealing a polished metal plaque that read, "You Belong Here Project, founded by Marcus Johnson, because everyone deserves to occupy the spaces they dream of. We want to formalize what's already happening," Luke continued, "to turn these scattered initiatives into a structured organization with a replicable methodology so more communities can benefit." Marcus was speechless. What had begun as a personal response to discrimination had taken on a life of its own, growing and branching in directions he could never have predicted. "You've already thought all this through?" he finally managed to ask, moved. "Actually, it was Mrs. Zora who suggested it," Jessica replied, smiling at the grandmother who had just entered the room. "She said stories like yours shouldn't be confined to one place or moment. They need to spread, inspire, multiply." That night, back at the apartment in Astoria, Marcus sat on his balcony, gazing at the illuminated city stretching before him. New York City, with all its contradictions, injustices, and beauty, had been the stage for his transformation. The same city that had witnessed his humiliation, now saw the birth of a movement that could potentially change many lives. He remembered the finger pointed at his face, the cutting words that had tried to define and limit him. Your place isn't here. 7 words that could have diminished him but had ironically lifted him to a greater purpose. 7 words that, redefined, had become the seed of collective change. His phone rang. It was Arthur Wilson. "Marcus, sorry for calling so late. It's just been confirmed. The You Belong Here project was selected as a finalist for the National Social Innovation Award. The ceremony will take place next month in Washington, D.C. The news was astonishing. The project, still so young, was already receiving national recognition. It was an external validation of the impact they were making, of the relevance of their work. This is incredible, Arthur. I don't even know what to say. Say that we'll go together to Washington, D.C. to receive this award. The whole team deserves this recognition." After hanging up, Marcus Johnson remained on the balcony for a long time, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. The journey from that fateful day at the dealership to here had been as unexpected as it was transformative. He thought of Richard Williamson and how his actions, driven by prejudice and arrogance, had inadvertently set off a wave of positive change. He thought of his father, Samuel, who had always believed in the power of education as a tool for transformation. He thought of Zora, whose ancestral wisdom had guided the family through critical moments. More than anything, he thought of young people like Luke, of the elderly like the ladies at the community center, of all those who, in different ways, had heard variations of the same cruel phrase, "Your place isn't here." Now, through the project that carried that name reclaimed, they found not just concrete opportunities, but also the confirmation that their place was exactly where they dreamed of being. The next morning, Marcus woke with renewed clarity. The prospect of the national award, though rewarding, wasn't the most important thing. The true value of their work lay in the lives transformed. The doors opened, the mindsets challenged. As he prepared for another day of work, he looked in the mirror and saw not just Marcus the engineer, director of Premium Motors, but all the versions of himself that coexisted. The son of Samuel and Catherine, the grandson of Zora, the brother of Jessica, the man who had been humiliated and chose to turn that experience into a catalyst for positive change. "Your place is wherever you decide it to be," he told himself, repeating the words that had become the project's unofficial motto. It was a simple statement, but profoundly revolutionary in a world still marked by so many visible and invisible barriers. With that thought, he stepped out to face the new day, aware that the journey was far from over. There was still much to be done, many lives to impact, many spaces to transform. But now he knew, with absolute certainty, that his place, and the place of so many others who had been systematically excluded, was exactly where they chose to be. End of story. Dear listeners, if this story of resilience has touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments if you've ever faced prejudice and how you turned that pain into strength. Your experience could inspire many.